Winston Peters, thank you for joining us. After nearly 1 year in government as part of the coalition, what do you think New Zealand First's biggest success has been?
Well, there have been many of them, and some of them are taking time to develop, as we always said they would. But the biggest success has been to stop what was happening and to turn that around in a compulsive way where the public understands what we're doing. You will have seen that the opposition have the belief, and certain sections of the opposition have no respect for democracy. They think, although they lost the election and seriously lost it, that they got a right to carry on in the same way as they did before when they were behaving and putting into place policies they'd never announced and had no permission for and no license from the electorate. So our biggest success is to stop that sort of trend and turn that around. And we're critical on that because our votes were the critical ones.
And what's been your biggest frustration?
The biggest frustration is to be in an environment where so many people didn't understand this seriously bad state of the economy. We spelled it out in 15th of March 2023. We set out how bad the other parties were making forecasts when they hadn't got the fiscal update for the quarter. They did it before the September quarter as well, and they still were saying these things, and we had waited for both things to happen, so we'd be campaigning with accuracy. But I was in an environment, and my colleagues were, and New Zealand First in an environment, where we're the only ones who are saying how bad things are. Now we know today just how bad they are.
Yes, I was going to talk about the figures which come out on this day, October the 10th, the day we record this interview. The FY result for June 2024 is out. Crown expense is up from 41% of GDP last year to 43.6% this year. Now, part of the coalition agreement is to reduce the percentage of GDP of core Crown expenditure. So why is it rising?
Well, first of all, if you've got a flattened economy or an economy virtually in recession, and yet your expenditure train that has been going at full bore is being slowed down, you're going to have that temporary misalignment. And we'd expect it to go on for a bit longer, but at least we're turning it around. Our problem is, of course, is not being able to shape the new environment where not only do you cut bad expenditure, but you keep the volume of good expenditure going so that there is no long-term recession. This is well true. Pride goes back to the 30s, 40s, and many countries in the past have learned the lesson that we should be learning now. So we are still learning this lesson.
But government expenses in the last year up $18.2 billion.
Yes.
That's extraordinary, isn't
But
it?
if they hadn't railed in, they'd have been probably up about $25 billion. That's the reality of it all. We've had to slow things down, realign expenditure. We, for example, had, and it sounds astonishing in our health system, but we had over 3,000 too many nurses hired. And everybody says, well, where are they? And the answer is, well, wherever they are, they're not in the right place they are, and the proper examination of that takes time. We had an economy that mirrors the fact that for a long time, for decades, we've been sliding in the OECD. We used to be in the first 3. Now we're lucky we're in the first 23, probably going 33, to be honest with you. And we need to face the reality that we'll only turn it around with some sound fiscal and financial policies, and they're not ideological. That's our country's. That's been our trouble as a country.
But $18.2 billion more than last year, do you think you could have been more ruthless in your expenditure? And I think, for instance, just off the top of my head, I'm a pensioner, you're a pensioner, we both get the winter heating payment. Now, surely there's money to be saved there, or at least make it means tested, for example.
Well, you could say that if you didn't have this stupendously stupid power policy that was brought in by Max Bradford in 1998. And you remember what he said? He was going to plateau power costs. Well, the plateau became vertical, and every other party was cheering along. One party said it was a mess at the time, and we still say so. And we also added for there to be a proviso that the government would set the price, and the government never has. They, back then, Bolger and Shipley said that they would do that. They would set the price if it got out of hand. They've never done it.
Do you think that power generation in this country should be nationalised then?
I've always believed that. We had a cutting-edge
But the horse has bolted, though, hasn't it? Despite the government owning 51% of the big generators.
But who privatised it? Well, the National Party did. See, because they had no idea at all how to run the economy under Bolger and Shipley, I might tell you. And it showed. Remember, under Bolger, the 1990 election, we won by a massive majority, and then we have the mother of all budgets, and hung Parliament within 3 years for the National Party. That shows you how bad they were. But this ideological bent that New Zealand has taken has been a misery for us. And I look at the great parties of former times, like the Little Party under Seddon, or dare I say it, Coates, and we had Action Man, or dare I say it, Peter Fraser, who knew what he was doing, and Holyoake. These are the kind of people who set their minds to build a country and build New Zealand first. They even stopped, Murdoch buying the Dom the newspaper. Remember that?
Well, he got a share of it. in the end.
No, he stopped it originally. And the speech that Holyoake made was about this is a new country and it needs a new voice and it needs its own voice. It needs to be independent. Now, these are proud moments, but we lost it all in this neoliberal ideological binge for which for 4 decades we've been paying a massive cost. And
Yes,
which party?
but that's
which
past
party is
history.
the only party that said this has been bad?
But power generation reached crisis point this past winter. You well know that. We all know that.
Yeah.
When are we going to get some kind of national, what's the current phrase, national policy statement on power generation? Because surely some more coordination has got to happen if we're going to keep on creating the amount of energy this country needs as the population grows.
Well, you're quite right, but which party's been saying we should adopt the Temasek model of Singapore, of Lee Kuan Yew? One party, New Zealand First, Winston Peters and Shane Jones have been saying that for almost over 2 decades now. We need to have a proper management of our national taxpayer-owned assets. But what did we have? We had a cutting-edge advantage in cheap power for New Zealand business and New Zealand homes, a bit like Saudi Arabia oil and diesel there. You don't pay the top of the price for diesel and oil in Saudi Arabia, but we're paying the highest price in the world for fuel in New Zealand, and 87% of it's renewable. It's a disgrace. But I wish sometimes when you're asking these questions, you don't ask my opponents, what were you saying about this when all this went wrong?
Can we talk about a policy that was enacted very early on in the term of this government, which was a New Zealand First-led policy, the repeal of that tobacco legislation? Why were you so fixated on getting rid of that as quickly as you did?
Because we haven't really actually repealed anything of the sort. What we got is an utter mess that was hidden from the new Minister of Health, both Ministers of Health, and it's been exposed now that the mess that they were put together 2022 and 2023 has so many utilities that have batteries that are outlawed now. No one's actually enforcing the law. If they were enforcing the law, you would see
But I'm not talking about that. I'm
getting to it. But I'm saying they brought the stupid legislation through, and in a fit of frustration, before they got to the 23 election, they said, well, let the other crowd fix it. As a barrel, the Minister of Health should be telling you what went wrong here. But not one mainstream journalist has even done the basic work to find out what went wrong.
But
now,
I'm talking about the policy about the number of tobacco outlets, for instance, and the denicotinization of the cigarettes.
The first thing we did was, guess what? We put the tax on tobacco products up, not down.
Yes, on the 1st of January, but that was already in place, wasn't it?
No, in December we said it. Last year. Hardly got into government and we did it. But you wouldn't think so from the mainstream media, would you? And the second thing now, you got Philip Morris screaming out, this is hot murder for us and what have you. But apparently, we may have been in Philip Morris's pocket. Now, can you not understand the ridiculousness and how spurious the bias of the mainstream media is on this product? And what they want, of course, is zero smoking, which is a target, by 2025. Well, we're going to make it by 2024. That's the reality. But we only get there because of vaping. And who says that? Well, a 4-decade organisation with some credibility and who are honest, Ash is saying that. And that's who I believe, not these bunch of lying fraudsters involved in politics and the mainstream media.
But what about the repeal of the legislation which was due to come into place this year, the reduction of tobacco outlets from 6,000 down to 600? And then the whole look of the policy, which gave the impression that Philip Morris or the tobacco companies were going to be able to keep selling their tobacco more regularly, more often. And then the policy paper that Casey Costello put out, which was roundly criticised by the Ombudsman. So surely she's not without blame here, and at least the perception that she put out there.
Well, with the greatest respect to the Ombudsman, what does he know about it? I'm putting it to him right now. Which country is in the top 3 in the world in terms of cigarette cessation? New Zealand is. Who took it there? Well, a party called New Zealand First who had some smart alternatives to what their idea. Well, their idea was to blackguard it, stop it all, embargo any sales. Nothing would happen, and all of a sudden people would stop smoking. Look at Australia at the moment. They've got absolute chaos going on there with the black market, and gangs are in full control out of the Middle East. They don't know what the hell's going on. This is the kind of thing that these people who are absolutists in politics, who couldn't run the school tuck shop, have got no experience with pushing down our throats. So if it is an alternative, backed by Ash as far more safe than tobacco and cigarette smoking, then why wouldn't he make that the alternative? But no. These people, you see, they talk with forked tongue, as the Indians would say. They're absolutists. They say they're for this product, but they're going to do their most that you cannot get the alternative that takes you off smoking and it causes you to be part of a smoking cessation program. 185,000 have given up smoking because of this program. But what is their response? Nothing like understanding, just absolutism. These are the same people who talked about 0 deaths on our roads. Can you believe this? They talked about 0 deaths on our roads, and then they talked about 0 suicides as we were passing the assisted dying bill legislation. How do they get away with that? But you see, the mainstream media, they're shared like no one's business, when what they was talking about was totally ridiculous, as though you could have 0 deaths on a road. Somebody's going to make a mistake. Somebody's going to fall asleep. So maybe the road engineering is a critical thing when it comes to road repairs and road safety, but nobody's addressing that. They just make an absolute statement, and all the woke wankers cheer from the rafters about how good this is. Please grow up. Please realise we're a first world democracy. We're a world leader, and we can be again. But no, this sort of reportage.
So do you believe that heated tobacco products will reduce smoking? Are they a smoking cessation tool? Are they harmful?
Well, they're meant to be something like 75 to 95% safer than cigarettes. That's number one. And a whole lot of people have given up completely because of that. But whatever they are, they're a whole lot more safer than tobacco smoking and cigarette smoking. Now, if Ash is saying it, a credible group that's been around for 4 decades, why would I not trust them and then start believing some four-flushing politician who's got no record knowledge of any performance when it comes to human improvement whatsoever?
So
these are the same people. Look, they spend $1.9 billion on mental health and end up with 5 hospital beds. They're astonishing.
Is there anybody in New Zealand First with any connections to the tobacco industry? Does Casey Costello have any connections to the tobacco industry?
This is just laughable. I can't believe I'm wasting my time being asked by you. At the moment, Philip Morris is hitting I'm told, is brassed off to beat the band at this, and all of a sudden, having given you categorical evidence of this, I'm still being asked questions because even though you're not part of the mainstream media, you're succumbing to their nasty underground campaign.
I know Casey Costello, and I know about her business background, and I have no idea whether or not she ever had any connection with a tobacco company, and I just wanted to make sure of that.
She has no connection with Philip Morris whatsoever. She's told me that. I trust on that. I believe in her. I've watched her over the years. She is a seriously solid performer, and she's taking crap from the mainstream media and from Miles Averill, and they're not going to get away with it any longer. It's time we started dishing it back to them where truth is concerned.
Let's go to the fast-track planning legislation, particularly as it regards Northland. You're from Northland. Shane Jones is from Northland. There's 11 projects out of the 149 earmarked for Northland, including the development at Northport, which has already been turned down once. The 11 projects for Northland is twice as many, for instance, as Hawke's Bay, with a similar population. Is there a perception here that your home province might be getting a few favours?
Now, you've got to understand the history of this country. The North, because it had 17 ports one time, it had 17 port authorities one time before they all united. I know this is a piece of my historical research from my history degree. And they had 17 ports, and because they were serviced by the port, all their mainstream services like roads and railways were the most neglected in this country. They paid the price for their ready access by shipping. But when shipping changed, they went lagging on decade after decade, century after, for almost a century, falling behind. Now we're trying to fix it up. And why we're going to Northport, well, it's the only port in this country that's got a chance of matching and meeting the ships of the future, bigger ships, where will not require to be dredged when it comes to Northport. But everywhere else in this country, Auckland, Tauranga, none of them can do it because they haven't got the depth. Northport is so natural. And where in the world would you see a place with such a big port with no railway to it? All we're trying to do is catch up properly.
But that's the infrastructure to the port. What about the port itself, which has already had its application for expansion turned down?
Yes, but that's what's wrong with this country.
For environmental reasons.
Yeah, well, that's what's wrong with this country. So some environmental group said that it was important they stop it. Well, on that basis, how come we got a port in Tauranga? How come we got a port in Gisborne? How come we got one in Auckland? On that basis, why are they all not shut down? This is the kind of ridiculous behaviour that's passes for law in this country, and we bring things back to the basics. We want the people of this country who pay the taxes of all these judges and all these people sitting in these environmental courts to understand it's their needs we're trying to cater for, not you posh little elite at the top. That's the new game in town.
What about these conflicts of interest, perceived or otherwise? For
Well,
instance,
what could the conflict of interest be to try and get a railway to the port of
okay,
Monterey?
let's move away
Or is
from that
common sense,
project.
is logical common sense now a conflict?
Let's move away from that project in the north to, it's called King's Quarry, a project around Auckland. Andrew Ritchie is a shareholder. He was a director of the company. He's donated, I think, $55,000 to New Zealand First. Can't that be seen as at least a perceived conflict of interest that you're helping out one of your biggest donors?
55,000. Now that I've found that out, I'm going to go and ask them what the hell's going on here. Because the reality is, we're the party out there trying to fix roads up, trying to fix railway lines up, trying to make sure that what we had in the past, built by people all the way back to the 1870s by Vogel, is alive and modern again. And so Andrew Ritchie in the transport industry owes us big time. But I'm not saying he paid 55,000 for us because we did that. He probably paid it after we did it. And that'll be the truth. You've got to have a look at the record. It's the chronology that's important. And you're suggesting somehow that a party that's gone to the wire in so many court cases against big business in this country, no other party's got a record like that, and no leader has, can be bought off? You must be joking.
But it's been reported by RNZ.
I spent more money in court cases than all you journalists all put together, and you got the effrontery to say that I can be bought off.
That RNZ have reported $500,000 has been donated, not just to New Zealand First, but to the three parties of the coalition, donated to the parties of the coalition government by owners or people associated with the projects that have got made the shortlist, put it that way, the 149 projects that have been.
And your point is, I mean, are you saying?
Well, it's a perceived conflict of
No,
interest,
it's not
I guess is what I'm saying.
It's not a perceived conflict of interest because the final decision is not being made by ministers. You see what I mean? Nothing can help these people when they start their vicious attack. Mind you, they're on the taxpayers' teat all the time. They're screwing the taxpayer, taking money off the taxpayer all the time. You've got a Maori party that's got a cost ratio of expenditure about 4 times New Zealand First. Is anybody in me to saying how come these people got the highest travel in the world, that they're never turning up at Parliament and they're getting all this money from the taxpayer? Not a word. We as a party sometimes have got used less than 50% of our entitlement, and we've had not one word of commendation over 32 years. You see what's wrong with this country?
Of those 149 projects, how many do you think will get the final go-ahead?
I have no idea. I trust the process. And remember who started the process? Well, the Honourable David Parker, one of the smartest guys Labor's ever had, started the process. He had 17 of those projects, ready-to-roll projects, fast-track. Where was the demur and all the shouting? Not a syllable, not a sound, not a mutter, not a murmur from the media or the political system at all until we do it. And all of a sudden, the sky's falling in. You see what's wrong with our country?
But do you feel much more comfortable now that the final decision has been taken away from ministers and put in the hands of a panel?
I was one of the people that suggested it.
And when is the makeup of this panel going to be named?
So you people couldn't go around here and misdescribe what was going on.
And when is this panel going to be named?
Well, sorry, I haven't got the details. If you'd asked me, I'd have come up here with some prospective date, but I didn't know.
Okay.
That you were going to ask that question.
Yeah, but it will be made up of genuine experts?
I think so. I believe so. That's what we've asked for. People in whom the public can have trust.
But there will also be input from iwi, will there?
No more so than anybody else in the country. We're all equal, and that's what the big change that's happened in this government since we came back is we're going to set out to ensure that we will salute one flag, one set of laws while the law remains the same, and one set of values, and we're going to have regard to no one's special status at all. We're one country, we're all equal. That's what difference is happening here. And the party leading that charge is the party that fought since its foundation, and ever since I've been in politics, has had one message. We're all equal. As Fiona Cooper said, we signed the treaty to become one country.
But what of your...
And we are going to let a whole lot of ill-educated social university people, four-flushers, change the law of this country against our massive interest, whatever our background is.
So let's talk about that phrase which has caused so much discussion, division in the last 50 years in this country, the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. One of your coalition partners wants to tidy them up and actually define them. You've said you don't want to go down that track, you want to go down another track and remove that phrase from much legislation. How much progress are you making in that respect?
Well, look, to get a coalition signed, we had to agree to it. the bill, his legislation, going to first reading. In my view, and I've been honest with you and him, it's fatally flawed. Because it talks about the principles of treaty writing, the very thing that poor Maori Ngata, Buck and Carroll and famous Maori in the past said did not exist. And when the judges were meeting in the 1980s over this serious case at the time, these three judges wrestled on it and they couldn't come to any agreement on a matter of principles either. So how come all of a sudden there are these people arguing for principles? Well, they usually...
Well, it's in legislation.
No, yeah,
Winston.
it's in legislation, but I'd say just because it's in legislation doesn't mean it's not capable of being seriously examined. Because the first question I was asking, Margaret Mutu, a long time ago at university, 3 decades ago, I was asking her in her classes, so you explain to me what these principles are. No, you can't, Margaret, can you? But you're still teaching them, aren't you? That's what's going wrong here. They just pressed on.
But that's what David Seymour's trying to tidy up. He's trying to
he's
define what the principles should be
Yeah,
legislatively.
but how can you possibly define the principles of treaty writing when a master of law who got it in 2 years flat, which is a record for a law student, so I'm up in Ngata, doctor in literature and everything else, a leading Maori esteemed all over Maoridom, and far closer to the event, who knew people like Carroll, the first Maori Deputy Prime Minister, there was, who also won a general seat, I might add, in Gisborne. So he won just a Maori general seat. That's how respected he was. Here are these people far closer to the event saying it is a 3-article document and they means the following things. And all of a sudden you got these people trying to create what they would like the law to be. No mandate from the ordinary people of this country. No request from Maori people as to what you think Maori. No, I'm your leader, you take it, we take it or leave it. And we're not going to take it. And we're going to make sure they don't win.
So
Mr. Seymour's problem is he's fallen into the trap of talking about the principles.
So your mind is not for changing, even after a 6-month select committee process, if it looks like the public is very much in favour of what he's proposing? New Zealand First will not be changing their mind on this?
Well, how can we follow a proposal which is fatally flawed? This does the very reverse.
But that's a politician saying it's fatally flawed.
No, I'm
the
not
public
saying,
might think
no,
that it's very much the way they want it to be.
Well, you might describe Apirana Ngata as a politician, but 102 years ago he wrote this very thesis out, and it's one that I studied as a young person, and I've never changed my mind. I'm Ngāpuhi, I'm from Ngāti Wai, I'm half Tainui, of course, but here's this famous Ngāti Pura leader. I'm Pan Maori. I would want to help Pan Maori organisations, whether it be Ratana Church, Maori Women's Welfare League, the Maori Wardens. Not everything is iwi. Because what's happening now is all this iwi fractionation is seeing not Maori advancing, but actually losing ground. And we want to change it.
All right, then. You said we're not going to support Seymour's bill because we don't believe there should be principles, and we're going to remove that phrase from, I think it was 55 pieces of legislation that you identified. What progress are you making on that?
We're making good progress. We're going through it carefully. We're carving them all out. We think there's about 54, 56 examples, and we're saying, why is that here? Or is it just a feel-good for some of you so-called law drafters? And some of you people sitting there, high and mighty in your lifestyle, supported by the taxpayer who's being punished by this legislation because you don't know what you're actually doing and why it's referenced there. When you've got to, for example, if you're changing a window in a planning building in Auckland and you've got to ask the local iwi whether you can change that window, things have gone far, far too wrong. And at all a massive cost. Is any ordinary Maori being helped here? No. Just in a little lead at the top. And who gave these Maori unelected a place on the Auckland Super City? Well, the National Party enacted, so I'm trying to recorrect this world as fast as I can.
But,
or have you forgotten that?
But the point is that the legislation still exists. Have any acts been passed or have any acts been amended in the Parliament whereby that phrase has actually been taken out?
There will be. I mean, this has been a work in progress. We're just quietly crafting our way through it. And I would expect that by March to June next year, we'll have completed all the work.
But the new versions or the replacements for the Resource Management Act, both of them, I understand, still allow for iwi and hapu input into the planning process. Is that really the step forward that New Zealand First campaigned on?
It depends in what context. If I can go all the way back to the Maori Development Act, which a Minister of Maori Affairs passed in 1991. Guess who he was? You're looking at him. But it had a place for Maori to be consulted where that consultation with them was relevant. But what's happened is consultations happening where it's not relevant at all, not special at all, and why should they be asked in the first place when they've got no more right to be asked than any other citizen? That's the difference.
What about water? Fresh water. National Policy Statement on Fresh Water has this concept called Te Mana o Te Wai.
Meaning what?
Well, the mana of the water. Even I can understand that. But it seems to, and the current legislation says that Te Mana o Te Wai, the health of the water, is more important than essentially the economic prosperity of the people who live near that water. Is this government going to change that policy statement to remove Te Mana o Te Wai?
Look, I don't believe so. First of all, coming from my background, not just Maori, but Pacific background as well, we know that water is a gift from God, a gift from the sky. Whatever it is not ours to own. But all of a sudden you got this ownership being put around it, and it's so darn wrong. You got the water care here doing a deal with Tainui.
With the Waikato River.
Just like that.
And the Meridian people doing it on the Waitaki River for the resource concerns there.
I know, and it should not be happening. And here we go. My message to Tainui, which I've got a connection with, is how many Tainui live in Auckland who you are now going to overcharge because of this? How can you justify this? This is not democratic. This is elitism. But you have to look around the parliament at other parties who are responsible for this sort of behaviour. But my party's not that party, I can tell you now.
But then when is Te Mana o Te Wai and that kind of activity that Water Care and the Meridian Power Company had to undertake, when is that going to be stopped? When is legislation going to be put in place whereby they don't have to do it? They don't have to pay iwi exorbitant sums of money.
Well, enough people in New Zealand who are voters get their heads around this and decide we're going to support a party that has got conviction in this matter and has got a record of standing against it all this time. All these years. I've taken more attacks for being a potato than anybody else. You know that.
Yeah, but what about your parliamentary colleagues, particularly in the National Party? Do they have any appetite for it?
You'll have to talk to them. That's the interview that you're going to have with them.
Yes, but you're the Deputy Prime Minister. Surely you've got some sway around that cabinet table about these sorts of issues.
Well, right now I have, for example, the MACA, the Marine and Coastal Area Bills legislation being changed. It should have been changed. It should have been repealed. I was the one that got the legislation there before the foreshore and seabed legislation. Accepted by every Maori tribe in this country. Every Maori in this country, all on the coastline, all supported it. So what on earth was John Key and Finnison doing, repealing my legislation and putting their mess in? That's got now over 600 claims, all being paid for by the taxpayer. It's an awful legacy they've left us. But my point, looking back again, is to some of you people in the media is, what the hell were you doing at the time when this disaster was going on?
That was in the days when the media was better funded and had more resources as well.
Yeah, good question. I'm still asking. Had more funds, but they did. Why didn't they spend it on that stuff? That is, tell both sides of the story. That's all I've ever asked for.
What about the judiciary and their role in the reinterpretation of that MACA, that Marine and Coastal Areas Act?
Oh, I think that decision is appalling, and we need to do something about it. We're going to take away their chance to meddle without constitutional or democratic licence.
But is that not political interference in another branch of the executive of this
they're
country?
the ones that are interfering. They're the ones who become judicial activists. They've decided to assume authorities and make statements that they're not empowered to make and have no authority to make and are not democratically elected to make because it doesn't belong in their bailiwick. Their job is to interpret the law, not write the law. You get the difference?
I do, but in the end, judges are appointed through the Attorney General and therefore through the government. So will there be, shall we say, not so much more care, but more due diligence done before judicial appointments are made in future?
Are they going to be less Antipodean Lord Dennings? Yes, they will be, because they're going to be told what the parameters are and get inside them and stay there, because that's the constitutional construct of one of the great democracies of the world. Only 9 can make that claim, going back as far as us, and we're not having our record ruined. The second most important thing is, there have been examples of other countries. Roosevelt had to do that. Roosevelt realised that the courts were going to ignore him, and he decided, well, if you're going to ignore me, having been democratically elected by the American people, I'm going to give you a lesson you're never going to forget. And he taught them a lesson. And I'm not pointing to any particular judge, but I'm saying is when you go outside of your constitutional construct and assume the rights of a democratic elected government and start contesting their right to govern, having been given that license by the people, then you're way out of line. not complex. And I believe a great number of judges actually think that now. They know that something's gone awry. They can't say so because they're being very, very circumspect. But I know enough about the judiciary to know that some of them are very unhappy as the pathway down which some of these, jurisprudential activists appointed by politics and politicians to be judges about the pathway they've gone down.
But aren't we running the danger now of the way the American system works, where a Republican president will nominate for the Supreme Court conservative lawyers to that role? Aren't we running the risk then of not being completely open in our judicial appointments?
You raise a fair concern, and it's something I understand very acutely. One's expectation is, though, that these judges themselves will understand what their parameters are. You shouldn't have to tell them. That's just how our system works. There's a separation of powers. Parliament writes the law, you adjudicate over it. You don't write the law.
Let's go to some other matters that are in the coalition agreement. You said you wanted to remove and replace the RSE policies in schools, the relationship and sex education program,
Yes.
the curriculum which was being put around in schools. Is that happening? Is that being removed?
It's a work in progress. It's an attack on parental rights. It's an attack on the belief that parents should be consulted as to what their children are being taught, that we all as a society should know before anybody goes down that pathway what the curriculum is. And you've got these people, it's happened in so many areas of our society, they just usurp powers, assume powers, and get affronted when someone says you've got no right to do that. You see what I mean? There was a time when nobody as a teacher would even think that. Look, I'm a former primary and secondary school teacher before I went into the law, and I've got a long, big family connection with it, with education. But the very idea that you just go down this pathway would upset anybody of my generation and all the people who trained with me. And when we used to be in the first three in the world, mind you, not where we are now. See what's gone wrong?
Yeah, I do. This might be getting into the minutiae of education funding, but there's a group called Inside Out, which is very much at the forefront of this RSE program in schools. They were being funded to the tune of nearly $1 million by the government. Do you know whether or not they're still being funded by the government?
I don't know that, but now that you lettered me, I'll get onto it.
Sport New Zealand and its rules for transgender women in women's sport. You were very hot on this in the campaign before the election last year. How confident are you now that Sport New Zealand will change its attitude after Chris Bishop's announcement in the last couple of days?
Sport New Zealand should have seen the coalition agreement. They knew it was an agreement between us. And now we've had to write to them, Minister Bishop has, to say to them, see that coalition agreement? Start honouring it. Now this is just the beginning. We're going to press on. And if they don't, then the matter of taxation support for their operations will be directly in question, because the taxpayers are owed an answer on this matter. When 50 athletes come out and support what we're saying, on the basis that we're not against anybody, but it's about fairness, why should a woman or a girl be in a contest where someone is physically advantaged because they're a different gender? It's just common sense. And why has it become so unusual in 2024 that we hear some common sense and some people get aghast at it? Perhaps it shows how wrong our education system has been these last 30 years.
Is it fair to say that Chris Bishop would not have acted unless you had prodded him?
I can't say that. You'll have to ask Chris.
But have you been hot around the cabinet table on this issue? Have you made your point forcefully around the cabinet table about this?
I made it forcefully in the coalition agreement. And we signed an agreement for it to be honoured. We're honouring it. We are doing things sometimes we don't like, but we've signed the agreement. We've got to stick with it.
In the coalition agreement, you said, as a matter of urgency, we will issue a Cabinet Office circular re the government's expectation that public services should be prioritised on needs, not race.
Yeah.
That was finally issued in September.
Yes.
By the ACT Party, not by New Zealand First. That was 10 months after the coalition government was formed. Do you call that urgent?
Well, it's not by the ACT Party. It's the ACT Party on behalf of the coalition. You got that part right? It was our request, not the ACT Party's for it. They just forgot to happen to have the portfolio that does that position, that does that job. It would have been in my portfolio. I'd have issued probably in December last year. That's all I can say on that matter. And it's right. We're saying it's need, not race. You're no longer going to go on and create your own fiefdom based on the myth that somehow some people have got a great entitlement because of the colour of their skin, or dare I say it, their gender, or dare I say it, their religion. It's just wrong. We want equality.
So why did it take so long?
I'll have to ask Mr. Seymour that, won't you?
All right. On a similar vein, the official New Zealand government website, I just saw this today, www.govt.nz. Do you know what the top line heading on that website is?
Well, not at top of my head, no.
No, it says Kawanatanga o Aotearoa. Government of
The
New
government of
Zealand.
Aotearoa, well, again, you see that you've got people not paying attention. The fact that this name is an insult to the Ngai Tau and all of the South Island, whose name is Te Waiponamu, the fact that this name comes from French Polynesia.
But this is the government website.
Yeah,
so
I know,
why
but,
hasn't it been
but
changed?
you've got to, Richard, you really actually got to take a pitchfork sometimes around to some of these people and tell them, do this or I'm going to poke your bum. That's how arrogant they are. You know, they have the old view of that famous poem about River Thames. For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. I'm a civil servant and I can listen to you, even though you're elected and I'm not. And you have to go along to make sure when you're leading a department, you tell them, if that's your attitude, leave now, because you're going to have trouble. While I'm here and while my party's here and while the policy's here, you're going to follow the script of a thing called that most rare flower in the history of humanity, democracy. It's about listening to the people, and they don't get it.
New Zealand and the World Health Organization,
Yes.
the WHO. How stringent will this national interest test on the international health regulations be?
Well, it's at our request, both with respect to the United Nations and with respect to the World Health Organization, that anything that's passed, first of all, goes through our national interest test. How stringent will it be? Well, we know what a national interest test is, and we want an open discussion before we bind ourselves to something, having never told anybody. It's like John Key. Sends over Peter Sharples in the dark of night and signs up to the UN convention that says all of a sudden that we are no longer in control of our laws. I mean, that was a shocker when he did that. But he didn't just stop there. I mean, they've done it on other occasions to do with the Maori, so-called Maori rights. The Maka, the foreshore seabed, is a classic. Appalling legislation. And I want to ask some people in the National Party, and dare I say to other, what I call right-wing voters, how on earth do you allow this to happen? Sell us all down the drain. And then you look at people like me and say, Winston, why don't you fix it up? See why this is not fair? But we will.
But the international health regulations, from what one reads, give the WHO some extraordinary powers over sovereign nations. How can you ensure that that will not happen in the case of New Zealand?
Because when they were going about that in the last 2 years, we were interposing even then outside of Parliament a barrier to that. We were doing our best to stop them then. And the moment we got a chance with the power of forming the government, we made it very clear that in our coalition agreement, that this country would not do any of those things, would not sign to anything of international arrangement where the power and the rights of the people were taken off us by an international globalist group who have no accountability to the New Zealand people. We wanted to stop that directly there and then.
So can New Zealand First push the case so much that the national interest test will be passed? I mean, will some of your coalition partners be more enthusiastic about these IHRs than New Zealand First is?
Yeah, but the first challenge has not come yet. We're waiting for it. The first time they make a statement that, you know, for example, they had, and we stopped this in its tracks, they wanted to declare a pandemic from their office themselves, the World Health Organization.
That's right.
Whether we liked it or not. And we said, no, you don't. We're not going to have our rights taken away from us. We're a first world democracy. The UK woke up very late as well. A lot of countries were lulling themselves to think that the World Health Organization is a great organization. Well, like every organization, it's got to be kept up to mark, challenged all the time to justify what's going on.
Let's talk about the COVID inquiry, phase 2 of it, and your agree to disagree statement. Are you disappointed that you haven't got a full, independent, start from scratch inquiry up and running?
Yes, we are. We are, but one of the difficulties in our businesses, sometimes you've got to compromise. We try to spell out to them how wrong that their policy was, that it was a total waste of time, that one look at the terms of reference would tell any person of respect, don't bother going this inquiry because it's a jack-up. It's designed to cover the backsides of politicians and bureaucrats who have made mistakes. It's designed to cover up medical advice that was wrong. Anyone looking at that terms of reference knew that this could not be credible. And the moment I saw it, I said so and said, we're never going to back it. We're going to stop it the first chance we get. Well, it's taken us a bit longer. It's starting on 1 October.
But there's still no medical or scientific people on the commission.
Yeah, but they've been charged with finding expert advice. We're going to be watching it very carefully. This is the first time, the only time this inquiry will start getting credibility.
But many of your voters last year expected more from this particular inquiry, the second inquiry. Are you disappointed that it's not to be, as it says in the scope, the terms of reference, it's not to be legalistic or adversarial?
Well, what we want is, that's not a difficult thing to ask for. We just want the truth. And if we get it by the widest investigation we possibly can, with the best experts we can, putting it all on the table, having no regard to people's reputations and their previous positions and their previous stance, then we'll have a good inquiry. But what we had was being set up there was an inquiry to make sure that there was never any chance of us knowing what on earth had gone wrong. And I was there at the time. For goodness sake, I can remember I had a row with Jacinda Ardern and Bloomfield. They were claiming that this COVID had come from America or Australia. You didn't have to be a genius to work this out. I said there are 1,200 workers there and 2 have got it. They never got it at the factory. They got it downtown Victoria or downtown Melbourne. But they never got it at the factory. Otherwise, the 1,198 hadn't. You see the logic? Well, they stuck to it, and 3 days later they had to collapse and find out that was the argument that it came from there was false. But they only got around to thinking that when Miracle said, but we haven't sent you any products for 4 months. You see how bad it was? Mm. This is the podium of truth, and no one's able to challenge them. And that's when I began to say, there's something going wrong with this way we're handling this. This is starting to stink.
Is there even any point in having the first inquiry report, the Tony Blakely-led inquiry with John Whitehead, phase 1?
Well, I don't mind making it very, very clear, and I've said it publicly. Blakely had no business being on it. He works for some other company.
Well, I know, but it's going to be released at the same time as the second phase, which frankly just leads us to believe that it's all going to be fudged and it's going to be a big cover-up.
But you've got to ask the minister in charge, you've got to ask Brooke Van Bellen about that. Ask her to justify that. I've just been patient to try and get what we want, what we promised, and it's getting underway in October. But sometimes running a coalition is difficult, and you've got to be patient. But it beats a dictatorship.
But do you believe that this phase 2 will get to the bottom of it, particularly regards vaccine injuries, the impact of the vaccine on the population? Because we've seen all sorts of pretty worrying statistics which may or may not have been caused as a consequence of this big vaccination rollout.
Well, I promise you one thing, that I'll be watching it like a hawk. Once it gets underway, we'll be watching it every week to see how it develops. And we'll make sure we have people we can trust watching it every week to make sure we get out of this inquiry what we want. The truth.
New Zealand's stance on the conflict in the Middle East, when we talk about your role as Foreign Minister, you talk often about New Zealand supporting a 2-state solution. Considering the conflict between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, between Gaza and the West Bank, is it possible that there can ever be a 2-state solution when Palestine itself struggles to unite into one state?
Well, that's the tragedy of it all. It's so difficult. In Palestine, if you look at it from a state point of view, you've got to go about to seeing it as a British creation going way back a long, long time ago, after the before and after the Second World War. It's seriously complicated. And you've got a small minority, a fraction of the population of Palestine are there creating absolute havoc. You've got a fraction of the population of Lebanon doing the same. You've got the Houthis in Yemen doing the same. This is chaotic. And until countries stop financing these operations by their proxy, like Iran, we've got a big problem on our hands. And we have, across the political divide, whether it's been whatever the shape of the government, we've always believed for decades in a 2-state solution. But we got a deal to Hamas and Hezbollah and the circumstances of Yemen now before we can possibly get there to the truth. And this is the difficulty of it all, because they were firing rockets over every darn day from Lebanon. How long do you think that was going to be tolerated?
But this is an intractable problem, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you begin by saying that the problem's intractable, you never get anywhere.
But it doesn't go back to 1948. It goes back centuries, millennia before that.
Yes, but so did Camp David when Jimmy Carter got them together for 11 long days. He stuck at it until they got an agreement. And Egypt, and Israel have honoured it.
What about New Zealand's role in all this? Should we just stay as far away from it as possible?
The trouble is that all of these things eventually affect you. When you go and speak to the foreign minister of Egypt, and he says, the tragedy with what's going on with the Red Sea and this rebel activity and this terrorist activity, he said it's costing us alone $6 billion a year in the fees going through the Suez Canal. And straight away you know what it's costing us, because all these actions, fictitiously based on their concern for the Palestinians, is having a huge effect nationwide, worldwide. So we'd like to say we're not part of it, but we're going to be affected whether we like it or not.
Because our produce is going through
That's right.
the Suez Canal.
We're a trading nation, both ways.
Yeah. What about New Zealand's role in the Pacific?
Well,
in particular with the increasing Chinese influence on many Pacific islands, I think of Tonga, especially, that has, it really owes its economic existence to the Chinese money in the country, and it's in debt that it probably will never pay off. How does New Zealand maintain a relationship and a presence, almost a friendship with those islands, when there's so much in hock to the Chinese?
Well, in 2018, we set out, when I was last Foreign Minister, what was called the Pacific Reset, with our request that people have their eyes wide open as to what they're watching. And we set out to do as much as we possibly could to fill the void that had been built up under previous administrations and previous foreign ministers. And I came back in 2023, and you wouldn't believe how big the vacuum was. There are places that never seen the foreign minister at all. No one had bothered being there. They have gone there. And by the end of this year, we'll have gone to the whole lot in the Pacific Islands Forum. Now, here's the point. New Zealand can be of enormous help in the Pacific, far greater than many politicians and many civil servants, dare I say it, so-called political scientists and commentators understand. We have a tremendous capacity to be the country we should be, and the wherewithal is in our reach if only some of the people who lead politics understood the vision that we must have. In short, of course we can help Tonga out of its present demise, but we've got to know long term, what does that mean? We can't go straight back into the same sort of accounting proposal or cash book diplomacy where they buy off at the cost of the future and get into a debt situation where now your political decisions might be measured by your concern about your debt level. Can we fix those things up? I'm convinced we can fix the whole lot up. Why do I say that? Because I talk to other countries as far removed as Norway who would like to help us in the Pacific. We just got to set the right standard. Get them to trust us that we are the bespoke, best partner where the Pacific is concerned. But the United States is coming around very fast to the view. As the one country to trust in the Pacific, who understands the Pacific better than anybody else, it's a country called New Zealand. And we're working our butt off there to make sure we get far more engagement from other countries. And you'd be surprised, even in the Middle East, how interested they are in perhaps playing a role themselves with us.
Talking of the United States, is it going to make much difference to the New Zealand economy, to New Zealand trade, whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump wins the election?
Yes.
Okay, explain more.
I can't. The last thing we do is interfere with foreign politics.
I appreciate that.
But if you were to ask me who's going to win, I'll tell you secretly in a sealed envelope, but you can't wait until after the election. Unlike so many experts.
But Donald Trump says he's going to put
Unlike so many experts who think they understand politics, I think I do know a little about this business.
Donald Trump says he's going to put a 200% tariff on imported goods into the United States. Surely that cannot be good for the New Zealand economy if we're trying to sell our produce up there.
We got Donald Trump in our preparation under Mike Pence and Scott Brown in this country as their ambassador. We got Donald Trump to turn to his whole staff in front of Jacinda Ardern and everybody else and the ambassador and say to them on our free trade requests, which we've been making since 1939, he turned and said, okay, you guys, why not? If Jacinda Ardern had got up straight away and out the door as fast as she could, we'd been on our way. You see what happens when you haven't got experience?
So I take it from that you'd quite like to get into Donald Trump's office if and when he regains the Oval Office.
Well, anybody's
and get him to say that again and sign him up on the spot.
No, if you blow an opportunity, you don't get the same way around. But I can tell you now how frustrated I was when I heard that, because we'd done everything, so much so that Mike Pence said to Scott Brown, their ambassador to New Zealand, at this meeting, whose side are you on? And we said, Minister Pence, Vice President, he's on both countries' side. Don't you get it? We're in this together.
So what chance do you think, Ben, of a free trade agreement with the United States? As you say, it's been on the agenda since 1939.
I think in the right circumstance, anything's possible.
All right. What about India? Because we have to get our eggs out of the Chinese basket, don't we, in international trade?
But India, as I say, I'm not the one who said we're going to get a free trade deal. I've just said that what we've got to do is go out and get a whole lot of things right in this industry, this industry, and this industry. And all of a sudden, it'll start looking like New Zealand's got a serious free trade arrangement. Australia's got one. Now, it's not a great deal, but I think we could do better if we don't ask for the free trade deal, but we've got to be far more relevant to them. And that means you don't concentrate on the capital. You get out in the states where there's opportunity and where hundreds of millions of people live, and start making the connection one after the other. And all of a sudden, you'll have what you want. We need far more people on the ground. We've been kidding ourselves all these years. We're a trading nation who just wasted our opportunities, and other countries have gone straight past us. Do you remember it's 1985, and a whole delegation of business people go across with Mike Moore to India, and he came back and said he'd secured 500 million potential orders. You like that phrase, potential?
Yeah.
Well, that sort of bull dust is what's been our performance all these years, and we want to turn it around.
So we're still working hard on it. But
we're working flat out on it. We'll be going back as short as we can before the end of the year. But we're looking at areas where we can cooperate with them, where all of a sudden a better relationship with New Zealand, a small country, starts to make sense to India.
Will New Zealand First's influence in the government and the cabinet reduce when you stop being the Deputy Prime Minister?
I do not believe so, because we're getting close to the election, aren't we? And we mean to be back in 2026, big time.
You were born in 1945. That election year, 2026, you'll be 81 years old.
Yeah, now don't get ageistic. There's some people who have just born lucky, right? That have been abstemious, have had the right diet and stuck to the right diet for a long time. And there's some people who are just not lucky. I met Strom Thurmond. He was 100 years old when he finished up in the Senate, United States. I met Mahathir. We came back after 21 years Prime Minister to be Prime Minister when he's 93, and he's 98 years of age now, and he's still bouncing around advising people. Tens of thousands go to Omaha, Nebraska every year. I had a guy called Warren Buffett. He seems to know what he's doing, doesn't he? So let's not have this ageistic comment.
So Winston, I've got a 7 in front of my age now too, but let's...
then you should understand.
Yeah, so I take it from that then that you intend to be there again in 2026.
I think it's critical that we turn this country's future around and set us up back on the pathway that we once achieved a long, long time ago, not once but twice. We spent the last 40 years under neoliberal experimentation and all sorts of behaviour.
But that's not changing. That's not likely to change, is it? With National as the lead party in this coalition.
Yes, well, they're going to get some blunt lessons about how bad the economy is, and they're getting it right now. They would have seen today's figures, as I'm speaking. Who forecast that? Of all the people in politics, who forecast that? And I'm not boasting, but I am entitled to be believed in what I said.
All right, there's a couple of years to go in the term of this government without taking into account what might happen in 2026. What are the New Zealand First's big ambitions for the next 2 years?
Our big ambition is to double our size in Parliament, or even do better than that, and we have in the past done that. We think we can do that this time. We were in a terrible campaign in 2023 where the mainstream media was screaming out to everybody, why don't you rule them out? Why don't you rule out? You are going to rule them out, aren't you? This is a dirty, filthy campaign. The Serious Fraud Office wasn't full on, but had been...
You mean 2020?
No, but 2023 as well. Here we are in the comeback. We've smashed the Serious Fraud Office. It cost $4.2 million of taxpayers' money, and there's not one word of our victory in newspapers. We beat them because they lied, and so the political system. But here's the media, 2023, coming in, we're on the outside, no resources, virtually, and they're shouting out, rule them out, until day after election. Then they finally learned how to count and realise, holy Toledo, they got the numbers. They'll be deciding the government. See what's wrong? We're not going to make this mistake in 2026. We're getting around and ready now. Our base is stronger than it's ever been for a long, long time. And we're getting ready for 2026, and we're going to take this election out.
Okay, you had 173,000 voters for you in the 2023 election. What realistically do you think you can get, bearing in mind there will be a slight population increase? What do you think is the number that New Zealand First can achieve?
We were heading to 7% in the last campaign until everybody started shouting out to all the other people in politics, are you going to rule this guy out? Why don't you rule him out? See what a stall looks like? We'd have got to 14% on that basis the moment the campaign started. And you must never in a campaign let something stall. Look, they were doing it in 2002. 1 month campaign, snap election, we go from 1.8 to 10.8 in 4 weeks flat. We can do it. We're the only party that's got that record. So yeah, I'm confident. And yes, I'm going to keep myself for 2026. And I will be 81 years of age. And that's bad news for my opponents.
Thank you for talking to us.
Not at all. Thank you for having me.